All right, so this is a brainstem model that I've just borrowed briefly from lab. If you haven't learned the cranial nerves by name and number yet, I would highly recommend doing that. Throughout this video, I will be switching arbitrarily between cranial nerve name and number. If you're not quite there yet, though, I will leave this list out during the video for you to reference. And if you don't have a mnemonic that you like already, I'm sure you do, because it's a little more fun than this, but I use ooh to trap and feed venomous green vipers such happiness. Okay? So, on this brainstem, there are a couple landmarks that you should know besides the cranial nerves. The first is the thalamus, which is connected to our pons by our midbrain. Inferior to our pons, we're going to have our medulla with these two medial tracts known as pyramids, and these two more lateral tracts known as olives. So, on this model, where am I going to see cranial nerve 1? Surprise, trick question. Cranial nerve 1 isn't on this model. Why is that? That's because it is a tract of the forebrain of the cerebrum. Cranial nerve 2 is also a tract of the forebrain, however, we can see it pictured here with its signature X. All right. If we take one step down, we're going to find cranial nerve 3, which is ocular motor. Cranial nerve 4 is right next to it. However, it is originating on the back of the brainstem in between the occipital lobe and the cerebellum. Okay. Cranial nerve 5 is this big honkin' thing right here. That's our trigeminal. Why is cranial nerve 5 so large? What happens to it? Well, it's going to branch off into 3 sections. Okay, so what are the 3 sections of trigeminal? We have V1, which is, what is it? I know you know it. Ophthalmic. V2, maxillary. And V3, mandibular. Okay, so here's cranial nerve 5, trigeminal, which will become 3 branches. Abducens is up next, number 6. And for that, we're just going to take one more step down. Again, going a little bit more midline. And where does abducens get its name? Well, abducens is going to go to your eye and help abduct your eye, help give you that side view so you can side eye all your friends when they're being weird, okay? In lab, we often like to say that 7 and 8 are on a date, so they're going to be paired together. 7, facial, and 8, vestibular cochlear, okay? Now, 9 and 10 are going to be behind or lateral to what structure? What did we say that this was? This is our olive, so 9 and 10 are behind our olive. Speaking of 9 and 10, what is cranial nerve 10? That's our vagus. Do you know where the term vagus comes from? Maybe you're a little bit more familiar with the term vagabond, which has the same root. So vagus and vagabond, that root means to wander, which is very fitting for this nerve since it's quite long and widely distributed. All right, so 10, now we have 11, which most people call accessory, but in my little mnemonic, I prefer to call spinal accessory because it helps you remember where it's from. This big long structure right here is spinal accessory. It's technically kind of not a cranial nerve because it's originating on the cervical spine and then merging to eventually become a cranial nerve, which we'll discuss how that pathway works later, but spinal accessory, which leaves our last nerve, cranial nerve 12, up hypoglossal. And this is between our olive and our pyramid. Cool? Not too bad, not too scary. Now let's talk about where those are going in the actual cranial vault. So we should know where cranial nerve 1 is going by now because I've mentioned it at several points throughout this video. It's going to our cribriform plate on the ethmoid bone. All right, cranial nerve 2 is going to our optic canal. Cranial nerve 2 is optic canal. That seems quite reasonable. However, this next opening, which we called the superior orbital fissure, is rather large, so it's going to have several things running through it. In fact, it's going to have cranial nerve 3, 4, 5, and 6. It has 4 cranial nerves running through it. But if we think back to cranial nerve 5, which was trigeminal, there are 3 branches of cranial nerve 5. Do we think that all 3 branches are leaving through this fissure? They are not, only the first branches. Okay, so only V1 ophthalmic is going through this. Where are V2 mandibular and V2 maxillary and V3 mandibular going? They're going to be going through these next 2 foramen. What did we say that these were? So if you remember, we had our sella turcica, our Turkish saddle, and our cowboy Ross. So this is foramen rotundum with V2 and foramen ovalis with V3. So now we've covered cranial nerves 1 through 6. What do we think is going through this hole, our foramen spinosum? That's also kind of a trick question because it's not cranial nerve 7. This is going to be our middle meningeal artery. Okay. 7 and 8 are on a date, so they need a bit bigger of a foramen. And if 7 is facial and 8 is vestibulocochlear, it would make sense that they leave through our internal acoustic meatus, right? However, our external acoustic meatus is not where the facial nerve is exiting the cranium from. Where did we see it in lab? We saw it between 2 processes, somewhere in this area. We've already named them, specifically our mastoid process and our styloid process. The facial nerve is coming out from this little divot between the 2, known as the stylomastoid foramen. Okay, then it goes on to the parotid and branches into your 2 Zanzibar bimotor car. Cool? All right, continuing on, we have 7 and 8. Now, if we move inferiorly, we again have another large opening, which was known as our jugular foramen. And what's going through here is everything else except for cranial nerve 12. So 9, 10, and 11 are all going through our jugular foramen. However, remember how I put spinal accessory on nerve 11? That's because it's originating in the spine, which means it's below this. It has to come in through our foramen magnum and then loop back and go out of our jugular foramen. So spinal or spinal accessory is a little bit different from our other cranial nerves. Lastly, we have cranial nerve 12, hypoglossal. It's quite easy to remember where that leaves because it's going through our hypoglossal canal. Easy peasy, lemon squeezy. If you guys have any questions, please come and ask me. Good luck.